Here in Ottawa, frustration recently boiled over at yet another delay in the city's over-budget light rail transit system. More than 6 years after it was first announced, the train is well over 400 days late. The inaugural run was set for May 24, 2018, but there have now been 4 missed deadlines and counting. Ottawa is hardly unique when it comes to public infrastructure projects being finished years late and way over budget. Montreal's new Champlain Bridge was more than 6 months behind schedule before reopening recently, while subway extensions in Toronto are years late. We've seen cost overruns and delays for energy mega projects across the country, from refurbishing Ontario's nuclear plants or building new hydro dams in Newfoundland, Manitoba, and British Columbia. According to MLI Senior Fellow Philip Cross, the question we should be asking is this: why don't governments learn from their infrastructure planning failures? Both delays in construction and lack of planning for contingencies explain cost bloat. In Ottawa, for example, a large sinkhole opened up downtown that flooded the newly dug subway tunnel. But instead of expecting the unexpected, public infrastructure projects rely on what the World Bank calls the everything goes according to plan assumption. Even though no mega project ever proceeds smoothly, planners use this assumption because it lowers the initial cost estimates presented to the public. 4 prominent studies of public infrastructure cost overruns found that they average between 45 and 86% of the original estimate, with some exceeding 100%. The same studies describe the planning process as seriously flawed and a grave embarrassment, with the occasional accusation of lying thrown in for good measure. Nor is there much evidence governments learn from past mistakes. One review of 111 projects found cost overruns today are as large as a century ago. The runner-up to the Suez Canal's record overrun of 1,600% at the end of the 19th century was the Sydney Opera House's 1,400% in the 1960s. Lack of learning is also evident in Ottawa, where City Council recently approved $4.66 billion for a second light rail line, 50% above the initial estimate of $3.1 billion, despite the fiasco of the Confederation Line's construction. Demand forecasting for public infrastructure projects is no better, unfortunately. Ridership for transport projects rarely meets expectations. Actual traffic on the channel connecting England and France turned out to be only 18% of predictions, one reason that the consortium that built it went bankrupt. The outlook is similarly unpromising for Ottawa's light rail project. Urban rail use, on average, is only 51% of forecast demand, including a paltry 15% in Miami. Already, bus transit use in Ottawa has fallen by more than 3% since 2012, despite a rising population, as frustrated commuters shift to cars. People always think the bus is a great option for the guy in the car in front of them. Why are forecasts for both the cost and use of public sector infrastructure projects so bad? To begin with, the government's role as a promoter of mega projects compromises its responsibility as the guardian of the taxpayer's interest. Proponents of infrastructure projects believe in their social benefits, and therefore they deliberately lowball costs and exaggerate benefits to secure the public's approval. And once work begins, it is next to impossible for governments to put the brakes on those same projects. More broadly, public projects suffer from a lack of accountability. Governments evaluate projects not according to the performance-based criteria of the private sector, but by their conformity to rules and prescribed processes. Governments don't hold contractors accountable for cost overruns, nor in turn are they themselves held accountable for overly optimistic demand forecasts. Most projects take so long that incumbent politicians are not around to take responsibility for misleading the public. When construction of the Confederation Line first began in 2015, Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson was moved to tears at the opening ceremony. 4 years later, it is taxpayers and people trying to navigate an increasingly impassable city who are the ones reduced to tears. I'm Brian Lee Crowley for the Macdonald-Laurier Institute.